Kate Harper had always been a woman with a plan. Ambitious, sharp, and full of dreams, she envisioned a life built on hard work, mutual respect, and a love that could withstand the tests of time. When she met Nate Harper on a crisp September evening in 2012, she thought she had found exactly that. The charity gala in Charleston, South Carolina, was bustling with laughter and clinking champagne glasses, but for Kate, the moment she met Nate, the world seemed to still. Nate, a recent graduate from a prestigious tech program, exuded confidence with his easy smile and insightful conversation. Their connection was immediate, a spark ignited over shared jokes and whispered ambitions. By the time the evening ended, Nate had scribbled his number on a cocktail napkin, slipping it to Kate with a promise of coffee. Their romance was a whirlwind. Over countless lattes and weekend hikes, they revealed their dreams to each other. Kate spoke of building a name for herself in real estate, and Nate shared his vision of launching groundbreaking software. They were partners in every sense of the word, cheering each other on as they chased their respective goals. By December, Nate was down on one knee under the twinkling lights of Charleston's historic waterfront, and 6 months later, in June 2013, they exchanged vows at a picturesque chapel surrounded by their closest friends and family. Life together seemed perfect. The Harpers settled into Briarwood Ridge, a serene suburb in Charlotte, North Carolina. Their home was a reflection of their shared tastes, modern yet inviting, with a sprawling backyard that often served as the backdrop for their Instagram-worthy dinner parties. Kate's career in real estate soared, her natural charm and keen eye making her a favorite among high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Nate climbed the corporate ladder in tech, his innovative solutions earning him promotions and accolades. From the outside, they appeared to be living the dream. Their social media profiles showcased sunsets on Caribbean beaches, skiing trips in Aspen, and intimate date nights at upscale restaurants. Friends envied their chemistry, their synergy, their perfect life. But cracks began to form in their meticulously crafted facade. Kate poured every ounce of energy into building her career, often bringing work home or staying late at the office. Nate's job demands escalated, and his hours grew erratic. Conversations turned into hurried updates or logistical discussions about bills and schedules. Their once vibrant connection faded into an unspoken distance, a gap neither seemed able to bridge. The topic of starting a family, once a source of excitement, became a point of contention. Kate insisted they wait until her career stabilized further. Nate, feeling increasingly sidelined, stopped bringing it up altogether. Beneath the surface, resentment simmered, though neither dared to address it directly. By the time 2024 rolled around, Kate and Nate had become skilled performers in their own marriage, presenting a united front to the world while drifting further apart behind closed doors. But neither could have predicted that the quiet rhythm of their lives was about to be disrupted by a force neither of them could control, a force named Mira Moretti. It was a chilly February afternoon in 2024 when Mira Moretti arrived in Forest Pines, a quaint neighborhood just a few miles from Briarwood Ridge. Her sleek black sedan, stuffed with suitcases and canvases, pulled into the driveway of a modest yet charming bungalow. To the neighbors who peeked through their curtains, Mira was an enigma, a woman with striking auburn hair, piercing green eyes, and an air of confidence that seemed out of place in the quiet, conservative suburb. But if Mira noticed the stares, she didn't let on. She had learned to steel herself against judgment after her divorce, a bitter, humiliating end to a marriage that had once promised forever. Mira was determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. Moving to Forest Pines was her way of starting fresh, far away from the whispers and pitying glances she'd endured back in Atlanta. She threw herself into unpacking, transforming the bungalow into a reflection of her vibrant personality. Bright canvases depicting swirling abstracts soon adorned the walls, and her kitchen smelled perpetually of lavender and fresh-baked bread. The Harper household first became aware of Mira at a Briarwood Ridge community event in early March. Kate had been roped into organizing the fundraiser, as usual, and was busy directing volunteers when Mira walked in. Draped in a flowing emerald green shawl and carrying a tray of homemade biscotti, she drew attention effortlessly. Kate, intrigued by the woman's bohemian charm, approached her with a warm smile. "You must be new to the area," Kate said, offering her hand. "I'm Kate Harper. Welcome to the neighborhood." Myra's laugh was light and melodic. "Thank you, Kate. I'm Mira Moretti. Just moved in last month." This event looked like the perfect way to meet people. Within minutes, the two women were talking like old friends. Myra's stories of teaching middle school art classes, volunteering at local galleries, and traveling through Europe captivated Kate. Over coffee and biscotti, they discovered a shared passion for creativity. Kate had always admired art but never allowed herself the indulgence of pursuing it. Myra's fearlessness struck a chord in Kate, who felt increasingly trapped by the expectations she had imposed on herself. Soon, Mira became a fixture in Kate's life. The two women began spending weekends visiting art exhibits, trying out new recipes in Kate's gourmet kitchen, and sharing intimate conversations over glasses of wine. Kate found herself confiding in Mira about her struggles, her frustrations with Nate's long hours, the growing distance in their marriage, and her fear that she had lost herself in the pursuit of perfection. "You're too hard on yourself," Mira told her one evening as they sipped red wine by the fireplace. "You've built an incredible life, but it's okay to want more. To want freedom." Kate envied Myra's ability to speak so openly, to live unapologetically. It was as if Mira embodied everything Kate had repressed: spontaneity, self-expression, and a refusal to conform. But Myra's presence wasn't only reshaping Kate's world. Nate, initially content to let the women bond over their girl time, found himself increasingly drawn to Mira as well. Their interactions began innocently enough: a shared laugh over dinner at the Harpers' home, a casual chat about the latest exhibit at the local museum where Mira volunteered. Yet, as the weeks passed, Nate found himself seeking out her company more often. Mira, with her sharp wit and infectious energy, breathed new life into the Harper social circle. She convinced Kate and Nate to join her for salsa dancing at a downtown bar, something Nate never would have considered before. At one dinner party, she charmed the room with tales of her time studying art in Florence, leaving everyone, including Nate, hanging on her every word. For Nate, Mira represented everything his life with Kate no longer did: spontaneity, passion, and the thrill of discovery. He admired her free spirit, the way she found beauty in the mundane and excitement in the ordinary. He began to look forward to her visits, their conversations lingering long after Kate had gone to bed. If Mira noticed Nate's growing attention, she didn't show it. Or perhaps she did, in the subtle tilt of her head when he spoke, the way her laughter seemed to ring a little louder at his jokes. It was hard to tell whether Myra's charm was deliberate or simply effortless. For Kate, Mira was a much-needed escape. For Nate, she was a dangerous temptation. For Mira herself, she seemed blissfully unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of the storm she was stirring. By April, Mira had firmly embedded herself into the lives of the Harpers, a catalyst neither Kate nor Nate fully understood. Their once predictable world was shifting, the undercurrent of tension growing stronger with each passing day. None of them could have foreseen that this new friendship was setting the stage for a betrayal that would unravel everything. As spring blossoms began to bloom in forest pines, so too did the seeds of chaos. It was a Saturday morning in late April when Kate's world began to tilt. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light across the quiet streets of Briarwood Ridge. Kate had woken early, eager to surprise Nate with a breakfast in bed, something she hadn't done in ages. She had spent the previous evening preparing a platter of fresh fruit, croissants, and his favorite coffee, all laid out on the tray with meticulous care. But when she walked into their bedroom, tray in hand, the sight that greeted her froze her in her tracks. Nate's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. His running shoes were neatly placed by the door, but his car was gone from the driveway. Confusion spiraled within her, a knot tightening in her stomach. She stood there for a moment, staring at the vacant bed, the sense of something being amiss creeping over her. Nate was a creature of habit. If he went for a run, he always returned quickly, sometimes bringing coffee or a bagel. But this was different. She set the tray down on the dresser and grabbed her phone, dialing his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice rushed and out of breath. "Hey, I'm just finishing up my run. I'm going to pick up some bagels. Be back soon," he said, his tone strangely casual. Kate forced a smile, trying to ignore the unease creeping into her chest. "Okay, no problem. I'll wait." As the minutes ticked by, a quiet suspicion began to grow inside her. Something didn't feel right. The knot in her stomach twisted tighter. Kate tried to shake off the thought. It was just a run, after all. Nothing to worry about. But the seed of doubt had been planted. When Nate returned an hour later, flushed and a little winded, he carried a bag of bagels in one hand and a half-empty coffee cup in the other. He smiled at her, his eyes meeting hers with a warm familiarity that made her heart ache. But something in his gaze, a fleeting moment of something she couldn't quite place, made her hesitate. "Morning, babe. Sorry I took longer than expected. Got caught in traffic," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. Kate nodded, her smile faltering as she watched him settle back into their routine. She tried to ignore the gnawing feeling at the back of her mind. But the next few days would only deepen her suspicions. It was the little things at first. Nate, who had always been attentive, began bringing her flowers unexpectedly. He'd suggest date nights, surprising her with reservations at fancy restaurants or tickets to a play. She appreciated the gestures, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't ignore. He was more present than usual, but also distant in a way she couldn't understand. He would hover over his phone constantly, glancing at it nervously when a message came through. When she asked about it, he'd brush it off with a smile. "I'm just busy with work, Kate," he would say, but Kate could see the lies in his eyes. Something had shifted between them. Something unspoken. Then there was the lingering scent of perfume. One night, after a late meeting, she leaned in to kiss him, her hand brushing against his shoulder. A faint scent, sweet, floral, and distinctly unfamiliar, wafted toward her. It made her recoil, a chill running down her spine. She asked him about it, trying to keep her voice casual. "It's probably just from the crowded elevator at work," Nate laughed off the question, his tone light but his eyes darting away, too quickly. The scent didn't fade. The doubt didn't either. Kate told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was overthinking, being paranoid even. But the nagging feeling refused to go away. By mid-May, Kate had begun to watch Nate more closely, her mind working overtime to connect the dots. It wasn't just the perfume or the odd behavior, there was something more. Something deeper. She found herself looking for clues in the mundane details of their life together, the things they used to take for granted. The moment of realization came one evening when Kate overheard a conversation between Nate and Mira. It was late, around 10 o'clock, and Nate had stepped outside to take a call on his phone. Kate, unable to sleep, had walked downstairs to grab some water when she heard her name faintly in the conversation. Curiosity got the best of her, and she crept toward the door, keeping herself hidden in the shadows. "I can't keep doing this, Mira," Nate said, his voice tense. "Kate is starting to notice. She's asking too many questions." Myra's voice, softer but still sharp, drifted through the cracks. "You knew what you were getting into, Nate. Don't act like you're the victim here." Kate's heart hammered in her chest as the truth began to settle in. The words stung, each one cutting through the carefully constructed life she had built with Nate. She backed away from the door, her breath shallow, and rushed back to their bedroom, her mind racing. The truth had hit her like a freight train. Nate wasn't just working late or getting caught up in the pressures of his career. He was having an affair with the one person she had trusted, the one person she had welcomed into their home. For the next few days, Kate tried to hold herself together. She went through the motions, working, socializing, pretending to be the woman everyone thought she was. But inside, a storm was brewing. The betrayal was too raw, too sharp to ignore. She had always prided herself on being able to read people, on understanding the subtle shifts in emotion and behavior. But this, the crushing weight of what Nate had done, was something she couldn't prepare for. Kate was no longer sure of anything. She had been fooled by the man she loved, and now, everything she thought she knew was shattered. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to let this go. That afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kate made a decision. The confrontation could wait. She had to gather herself first, she had to plan. The anger was building inside her, but so was the resolve. If Nate thought he could get away with this, he was sorely mistaken. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the life she had lost. And she would do whatever it took to make him face the truth. The truth was no longer something she feared. It was something she was ready to expose. And when the time came, Nate would have nowhere to hide. The days after Kate discovered the truth felt like a fog had descended over her world. She no longer recognized the life she had carefully built with Nate, nor did she recognize herself. The pain of betrayal was searing, but it was quickly replaced by something sharper: rage. She wasn't just angry at Nate. She was angry at herself for being blind, for trusting someone she thought she knew better than anyone. But most of all, she was angry at Mira. Mira had come into their lives so effortlessly, with her charm and her free-spirited attitude. She had captivated Kate with her stories of art and travel, drawing her out of the rigid boundaries Kate had set for herself. What Kate hadn't seen was how easily Mira had wrapped Nate around her finger. She had seduced not just him, but the entire world around her. She had used Kate's trust against her. And now, Kate couldn't let it go. The first night after her discovery, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation she'd had with Mira, every moment she'd shared with Nate. Slowly, the plan began to form in her mind, a strategy not just to hurt Nate, but to make him feel the way she had felt: vulnerable, deceived, betrayed. She would make them both regret ever thinking they could outsmart her. It wasn't going to be a quick burst of vengeance. No, Kate was a strategist. This would be calculated, methodical. She would show Nate and Mira that she wasn't the naive woman they thought she was. Kate knew who she needed: Dominic Foster. Nate's best friend since college. He had always been there, a steady presence in their lives, often serving as a buffer between Nate's workaholic tendencies and Kate's more grounded approach to life. Dominic was a good man, but more importantly, he was someone Nate trusted. And that trust, Kate realized, was the key to everything. Kate had caught Dominic looking at her more than once with an appreciative eye over the years, though he had never acted on it out of respect for Nate. She'd always dismissed it as harmless flirting, until now. Now, the thought of using him to get back at Nate seemed like a perfect way to bring everything full circle. If Nate could betray her, why shouldn't she use Dominic to get the same feeling of power back? The plan started small. Kate began to subtly increase her interactions with Dominic, knowing Nate would be too caught up in his work to notice. At first, she asked him for help with little things: picking up groceries, fixing a leaky faucet, discussing a fitness plan. These were innocent enough interactions, but Kate made sure she lingered just a little longer than necessary. She laughed a little too hard at his jokes, touched his arm in passing, made sure he noticed how good she looked when she wore something particularly flattering. She was playing with fire, she knew it, but the taste of revenge made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. Each moment she spent with Dominic was like a small victory, her power over him growing, his uncertainty about where things were headed deepening. Then came the night when the tension would snap. Kate had already decided when it would happen. Nate was working late, he always did now. His late-night meetings had become a routine, an excuse for him to spend more time with Mira. Kate knew exactly when he would be gone, and she had set the stage. She had invited Dominic over under the pretense of needing help with a leaky faucet. She made sure Nate was out of the house before Dominic arrived, setting the scene just the way she wanted it. When Dominic walked into the house that evening, Kate greeted him at the door in a silk robe, her hair tousled as though she had just woken from a nap. He raised an eyebrow at her appearance, but didn't comment. She led him into the kitchen, where she had already poured 2 glasses of wine. "It's been a long week, hasn't it?" she said, her voice soft, almost seductive. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." She could see the conflict in his eyes as she handed him the glass. They'd always had a flirtatious rapport, but this felt different. She leaned in closer, allowing her robe to slip slightly, exposing a little more skin than usual. Dominic shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from hers. "Kate, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice thick with hesitation. "You're married to Nate." "I know," she whispered, her fingers brushing against his arm. "But things between Nate and me aren't what they used to be. Haven't you ever wondered what it would be like, between us?" Dominic's face flushed. He opened his mouth to protest, but Kate pressed on, desperate for him to say the words that would confirm what she already knew: he was just as susceptible as Nate. She slid closer, her hand resting on his thigh. "I've noticed the way you look at me, Dominic," she purred. "I've always known. And tonight, I want to know what it's like." Dominic froze, his eyes wide in shock. He gently removed her hand from his leg, standing up quickly. "Kate, this isn't right. You're Nate's wife. I can't." Kate's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't disappointment she felt. It was validation. She had been right all along. Dominic, despite his attraction to her, wasn't going to betray his friend. His moral compass had won out. But that wasn't the end of it. No, not for Kate. She had done what she needed to do, she had tested the waters, and Dominic had failed. And that, in itself, was the ultimate form of rejection. She smiled as she watched him gather his things, his unease palpable. As Dominic left, she knew that her plan wasn't finished. It had only just begun. Kate Harper had set the stage for a devastating betrayal, one that would come full circle. But this time, she wouldn't be the one left holding the broken pieces. This time, it was Nate and Mira who would pay. The sun had barely set on a warm June evening when the storm inside Kate began to swell beyond her control. Her pulse quickened as she paced around the house, her thoughts swirling in an endless loop of rage and betrayal. The revelation about Nate's affair with Mira had shattered everything. The anger, the hurt, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness had been growing inside her like a fire, and tonight, it was going to explode. Nate was running late again, something that had become his pattern over the past few months. He had come home only long enough to change and grab a bite to eat before heading out for yet another meeting. He'd left without much of an explanation, his eyes avoiding hers. Kate knew better than to ask him where he was going or what he was doing. She had seen it all before. The lies, the excuses. The same ones he'd used to cover his tracks. Tonight, however, she wasn't going to let it slide. She had made up her mind. This was it. No more hiding behind the facade of marital bliss. She wasn't going to be a passive participant in her own humiliation anymore. Kate had spent weeks planning this moment, her mind constantly churning over how to make him feel what she had felt, how to make him truly see the consequences of his actions. As the clock struck 8 p.m., Kate heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel in the driveway. Her heart skipped a beat. Nate was home early. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Nate walked through the front door, looking tired but satisfied, as if he had accomplished something. Kate stood at the kitchen counter, pretending to focus on a pile of paperwork, her back turned to him. For a moment, she allowed herself to just breathe, to gather her composure. But deep down, she knew she was no longer the woman who had married him in that picturesque chapel all those years ago. The woman who trusted him implicitly, believed in their love without question, had been obliterated by betrayal. Nate's footsteps echoed through the hallway, and Kate's grip on the counter tightened. She was ready. Her pulse hammered in her ears as he approached. He said nothing at first, but she could feel his presence in the room. It was like he was waiting for something. A greeting, maybe. A kiss. Instead, Kate turned to face him, her eyes icy. "I know, Nate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate blinked, his face draining of color. For a moment, he said nothing, clearly caught off guard. He dropped his briefcase onto the chair by the door and took a step toward her. "Know what, Kate?" he asked, his tone feigning innocence, though there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Kate stared him down, her heart thudding in her chest. "I know about you and Mira," she said, her voice firm, steady now. "I know everything." A flash of panic crossed Nate's face, and in that split second, Kate saw the real Nate, the man who had been lying to her for months, maybe even years. The man who had betrayed her trust in the most intimate way possible. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. "Kate, he began, but she cut him off. "No, don't," she said, her voice rising. "You don't get to explain yourself anymore. You don't get to lie your way out of this." Nate opened his mouth to speak again, but Kate took a step forward, cutting him off. "I know everything, Nate. The late nights, the stolen moments. The text messages, the lies. I saw you. I heard you talking to her." He flinched, as if she had slapped him. His face hardened, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You've been spying on me?" Kate didn't answer. She didn't have to. The evidence was in her words, in the cool, detached way she spoke. He was cornered now. There was nowhere for him to hide. "You think you're the only one who's been hurt?" Nate snapped. "You think I don't feel anything? Mira and I, what we had, it wasn't about you. It was about me, feeling alive again." He sighed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I've been suffocating in this marriage for years, Kate. You don't even see it. I've tried, but we've drifted apart. You were too busy chasing your career. I was too busy pretending everything was fine." The words stung more than she had expected. They cut deep into the already raw wound in her chest, but Kate refused to let him see her pain. She crossed her arms over her chest, a cold resolve settling over her. "I never asked for you to cheat on me, Nate," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I never asked for you to betray me with her." Nate's expression faltered, and for a moment, Kate saw the guilt flicker in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something darker, defensiveness, anger. "Maybe I did it because I had to," he spat. "Maybe I did it because you weren't there. Because I was alone." Kate couldn't breathe. The words were like a slap to her face, and she felt her composure begin to crack. She had never imagined he would be so cruel, so vindictive. It wasn't just an affair, it was an accusation. He was blaming her for his actions. For his weakness. The air between them was thick with anger, regret, and something darker. It was the sound of everything they had built together crumbling. "Do you love her, Nate?" Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze flickered away, and Kate saw the hesitation in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for her to just hear him admit it. She needed more. She needed him to understand. To understand the depth of the betrayal. "I don't know," Nate finally said, his voice a hollow confession. "I don't know, Kate. I don't know what I want anymore." Kate felt her world collapse around her. She had spent years with him, building a life she thought was unbreakable, but now, everything was shattered. And in that moment, the rage inside her surged, unstoppable. She couldn't stand it anymore, the lies, the betrayal. The life she had worked so hard to protect had been destroyed by the very man she had trusted most. She felt the cold weight of something sharp in her hand, something she didn't remember grabbing. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, loud, jarring. Time seemed to freeze. The heavy silence that followed felt like an eternity. Nate crumpled to the floor, a dark stain spreading quickly across the beige carpet. The world tilted violently around Kate, and for a long moment, she could do nothing but stare at the man she had loved, lying lifeless on the floor. She screamed, her voice ragged, the sound of it tearing through the quiet of the house. The rage, the betrayal, and the pain had come to a head in that one moment of madness. Her mind raced, but it was too late. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. The moment of truth had arrived, and Kate's life, as she knew it, would never be the same again. The love, the lies, and the crushing consequences of her actions were now laid bare. The tragedy was complete. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in Kate's mind long after the silence had descended. Nate lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood slowly expanding beneath him. His lifeless eyes stared up at her, and for the first time, Kate felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold air. The weight of what she had just done crashed down on her, but in that moment, she felt nothing but emptiness. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch his shoulder. Her heart was racing, her thoughts scattered. The anger that had driven her to this point was now gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread and disbelief. What had she done? She had crossed a line from which there was no return. For several minutes, Kate stayed there, staring at the man who had once been her partner, her love. The man who had betrayed her. The man she had killed. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she clutched her head in her hands. She should have stopped, should have thought, but in that split second of rage, she had acted without thinking. Kate knew she couldn't stay there. She couldn't let this moment define her forever. But she couldn't run either. She had to face the consequences of her actions. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. The gunshot had shattered the quiet of the suburban neighborhood, and a few moments later, the sharp wail of sirens could be heard cutting through the still night air. Kate had barely gathered herself before the flashing lights illuminated the front windows of their home. The sirens grew louder as police vehicles pulled into the driveway. As officers rushed toward the door, Kate's instincts kicked in. She knew she had to act fast. She stood, her legs unsteady, her body moving on autopilot as she glanced around the room. But she couldn't bring herself to leave. Within seconds, the door burst open. Police flooded into the house, their eyes scanning the scene. Detective Claire Ramirez was the first to enter, her gaze immediately locking onto the body sprawled on the floor. Her expression was unreadable, but her trained eyes missed nothing. "Ma'am," Ramirez called gently, her voice firm but not unkind. "Are you all right?" Kate didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mouth felt dry, her mind racing. She was aware of the officers moving around her, securing the scene, but she remained frozen in place, her hands still shaking at her sides. "Ma'am, we need to talk," Detective Ramirez continued, stepping toward her slowly, her voice soft but authoritative. Kate nodded mechanically, her throat tight with fear. As Ramirez spoke to her, Kate couldn't hear the words. Her mind was numb, her thoughts fragmented. She had just killed her husband. And now the world was about to come crashing down around her. Within minutes, Kate was read her rights. The weight of the words felt surreal as the officers cuffed her hands behind her back. The sensation of cold metal biting into her skin brought her back to reality, but it didn't seem real. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. As the officers escorted her out of the house, Kate's eyes briefly flicked to the body of Nate, now covered with a white sheet. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the image of him, lying there, the man who had once been her everything. She wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but she knew there was nothing that could undo what she had done. The flashing lights of the police cars lit up the street as they drove her away. The house that had once been their sanctuary, the place where they had dreamed, built their life together, now felt like a distant memory. She was leaving behind everything, the life they had created, the family they had planned to build, and the woman she once was. Weeks passed in a blur. Kate was processed and held in custody, her face plastered across the news as the media picked up on the story of a woman who had killed her husband in a fit of rage. Her story, her betrayal, and the tragedy that had unfolded in Briarwood Ridge quickly became a sensation, capturing the attention of the nation. The investigation into Nate's death was thorough. Detective Ramirez and her team gathered evidence, interviewing neighbors, friends, and colleagues. They pieced together the details of the affair between Nate and Mira. The illicit texts, the secret meetings, the lies, it all came to light. But none of it, not the betrayal, not the affair, could explain the brutal reality of what Kate had done. Kate's trial began in late September 2024. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as the prosecution painted a damning picture of a woman scorned. The charges against her were clear: murder. The prosecutor argued that Kate had acted out of jealousy and revenge, that she had planned the murder in cold blood. The affair between Nate and Mira was the spark, but the fire had been fueled by years of emotional neglect and betrayal. As the defense presented its case, Kate's lawyer sought to humanize her. They argued that Kate had acted in the heat of the moment, overwhelmed by the emotional pain of discovering her husband's infidelity. The stress, the isolation she had felt in her marriage, and the depth of the betrayal had all played a role in the tragedy that unfolded that night. Mira Moretti was called to testify. Her tearful recounting of her affair with Nate, and her own sense of guilt and remorse, only deepened the tragedy. Dominic Foster also took the stand, recounting the moment Kate had tried to seduce him in an attempt to get back at Nate. His discomfort was evident, but his testimony painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed to the edge. Kate sat quietly at the defense table, her eyes vacant as the trial unfolded around her. She had no words to offer. The pain, the guilt, the shame, everything weighed down on her in that moment. She had destroyed her marriage, her life, and most tragically, the life of the man she had loved. When it was Kate's turn to testify, her voice cracked with emotion. She expressed deep remorse for what she had done, saying she would gladly trade places with Nate if she could. Her tears, her regret, seemed to sway some of the jurors, lending credibility to the defense's narrative. But it wasn't enough to erase the horror of the act she had committed. 2 weeks later, the jury returned with a verdict. Kate Harper was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, taking into account the emotional toll of the crime, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As Kate was led away in handcuffs, she glanced back at the courtroom, at the people who had once been her peers, her friends, her family. She saw the shock in their eyes, the pity, the judgment. But she didn't care anymore. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. The tragic story of the Harpers was over. A once perfect love had been consumed by lies, betrayal, and revenge. Briarwood Ridge would never be the same again, and neither would Kate. The lessons of love, trust, and forgiveness would be learned too late. For Kate, the price of betrayal had been too high, and the consequences, irreversible. The echoes of that night, of the gunshot and the life lost, would haunt her forever. Kate sat silently in her cell, staring at the cold, gray walls. The quiet of the prison was a far cry from the bustling life she once had, the dinners, the laughter, the love that had seemed unshakable. But now, everything was gone. Nate, the man she had once trusted, was dead. Their dreams, their future, had been shattered in an instant, and Kate was left alone to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed. Her days in prison were long and filled with reflection. The days blended together, each one feeling like a repeat of the last. She could no longer escape the weight of her actions. The realization of what she had done, killing the man she had once loved, sat heavily on her chest. The guilt and shame, compounded by the pain of losing him, suffocated her in ways she never could have imagined. But there were no do-overs. No way to undo the tragedy. When she closed her eyes, she could still see Nate's face, the pain, the shock, the moment of betrayal. His final, haunting look haunted her thoughts every night. She had once believed that her love for him would conquer anything. But she had been wrong. Love had turned into anger, and anger had driven her to a place of violence she never thought she was capable of. The trial, the conviction, it had all felt like a blur. In the months that followed, as the news cycle continued to cover the story, Kate had slowly come to understand the full weight of what she had done. She had tried to justify her actions at first, to tell herself that the years of emotional neglect, the betrayal, had been enough to push her to that breaking point. But deep down, she knew better. There was no excuse for murder. There was no excuse for taking someone's life, no matter how deep the hurt ran. Her sentence was handed down, 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Kate knew she would never be the same again. She had once been a woman full of ambition, love, and hope. Now, she was a woman defined by tragedy. The life she had once had was gone, and no amount of time could ever truly heal the wounds. The media circus surrounding the case had long since died down, and Briarwood Ridge moved on, as it always did. Kate's name became just another cautionary tale, another tragic story of love gone wrong. But for Kate, the story was far from over. She had to live with the consequences of her actions, to learn from her mistakes, and, perhaps, one day, to seek redemption. But redemption would not come easily. She knew that. It was a long road ahead, and it began with a single truth: forgiveness, starting with herself. In her heart, she knew that she could never undo the damage she had done, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to find some semblance of peace in the aftermath. As Kate sat alone in the dim light of her prison cell, she finally came to a realization. The anger, the resentment, the revenge, it had all been temporary. They had burned hot and bright, but in the end, they had consumed everything. The only thing that remained was the wreckage. The only way out was through understanding, through owning the pain, and learning from it. Kate's story wasn't one of victory or triumph, it was one of loss, and the slow, painful journey of self-awareness. It was a reminder that, in the end, the price of betrayal is steep, and the consequences of revenge are far-reaching. What do you think about this story? Do you think Kate's actions were justified, or do you believe she crossed a line? How would you have handled the situation if you were in Kate's shoes? Please leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear your opinions and engage with you on this compelling and thought-provoking story. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that delve deep into the complexities of human relationships, betrayal, and the choices we make.